So this may seem a bit late. I know that they announced it at E3 and it's already out now, but still, I really need to talk about it, and this is a great time to celebrate. Banjo and Kazooie are in freaking Smash Brothers. This is insane. I never thought that this would happen. This is like my #1 choice for Smash Brothers. I just... Sorry, I don't usually But seriously, I was freaking the heck out when they announced this. This is like a dream come true for me. Banjo and Kazooie have honestly been my #1 most wanted fighters in Smash for, well, forever, since the original Smash Brothers. For those that are unaware of who Banjo and Kazooie are, which would not be surprising at this point, since they're sadly not really getting any games released anymore, Banjo-Kazooie was a game series originally for the N64. Amazing 3D platformers focused on exploring large levels, talking to funny characters, and collecting everything in sight. Banjo-Kazooie was great. ThuN00b was awesome. Nuts and Bolts was interesting. I'll probably do a video on that at some point, so enough said there. Now, I could easily do a video on the first 2 games and just spend 40 minutes gushing about how much I love them. But I thought it might be more interesting to take a look at a Banjo-Kazooie game that not as many people seem to be aware of. Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge for the Game Boy Advance. Yes, there was a Banjo-Kazooie game for the Game Boy Advance. Actually, there were 2, but we're not talking about that one. While Banjo Pilot was a spin-off, Grunty's Revenge was an attempt at a full Banjo game on the GBA. A 3D platformer where you explore large levels, talk to funny characters, and collect everything in sight. The biggest difference right off the bat is that you obviously can't change the camera angle. It's an isometric platformer, which makes complete sense. So does this work? Is the game good? Let's take a look. So the plot of this game is worth mentioning right up top. Despite coming out long after Banjo-Tooie, this game actually takes place in between the first and second games. Klungo's still trying to free Grunty from this boulder, but realizes that he can't really make it budge, so he walks off screen and extremely quickly builds a giant mechanical body for her to inhabit. Wow, Klungo is smart! All he really did in Tooie was make some potions and throw them around. Didn't really help him much, but here, he's basically invented immortality. Oh yeah, and Grunty grabs Kazooie and then uses her magic to time travel away, setting off the events for the plot that follows. Grunty can time travel. She needed a large machine and a little girl in order to make herself look attractive, but she doesn't really seem to need anything to time travel. It's trivial, that's easy stuff. Fixing all this? Yeah, that's a tough job, but time travel? Between her immortal body and her ability to effortlessly time travel, Grunty is basically a god. So she kidnaps Kazooie and travels back in time. Her plan is apparently to manipulate events in the past so that Banjo and Kazooie never meet, therefore changing the future. Or at least that's what we're told to be the case. Show don't tell game, because although they mention this, it never really materializes at all. There's never really any scene in the game where Grunty does, well, anything to mess up the past. In fact, they really squandered the whole time travel idea. They literally do nothing with it. The plot in general seemed like a huge afterthought. Instead of having Bottles do the tutorials, you have this elderly mole named Bozai. I guess he's supposed to be an ancestor of Bottles? But, I mean, that isn't really much. He could have honestly just been his grandpa in the present. There's no time travel necessary. Mumbo's skull is now Mumbo's pad. He has a bunch of hip, cool stuff to show that he's younger, I guess, but he looks and acts exactly the same as he always has. They should have given him an afro or something. I'm being honest, that would have been funny. Just have him look identical, still have a skull for a head, but give him a big afro and maybe sunglasses. That might have been amusing. And a few times in this game, you'll talk to people and they'll just know who you are by name, even though you're from the future and you've never introduced yourself. And they don't even tell you how far into the past you are. A couple of years? 100 years? People seem to know who Grunty and Kazooie are, so yeah, it's a little confusing. I can think of a ton of cool stuff that they could have done with a time travel concept. Revisit old levels but in the past, meet younger versions of existing characters, travel back and forth in time and have stuff you do in the past affect the future, I don't know. They don't even really make any jokes about time travel. I just really don't get it. I mean, why did they do this? Why did they do a time travel plot? It's really just a build-up, but with no payoff. All they do is go back in time, and then at the end, they go back to their present time. There's just really no purpose.
Noob, it's an emergency!
Why the hell does your hair look like that?
I'm not the Mike you know. I'm Mike from the distant future.
I don't... What?
Come with me. We must time travel into the past.
Well, we're back in my room.
Aha, so it may seem. But we are actually in your room roughly 15 minutes in the past. You're actually in the bathroom right now.
Anyway, continue the video or whatever. Well, then what was the point of any of this? It's interesting because people love time travel stories. Durr, noob, it's obvious. The review is now infinitely better because we traveled through time. You're welcome. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Let's talk about gameplay. Like I mentioned before, the gameplay is strangely similar to the original games, though with some very obvious differences. It's a 3D platformer, but its isometric view and pixel graphics can often make it rather difficult to discern depth. Like, say there's a platform that looks like it's right next to you, but it could actually be further in front of you and higher in the air. Oftentimes, you just gotta try jumping in order to tell how much higher or lower a platform is to you. Besides that though, the game controls fine. All of the basic moves and maneuvers from Banjo-Kazooie are here. Well, maybe not all of them, but enough of them. And it's fun to explore all of the levels, collecting jiggies and unlocking transformations from Mumbo. Similar to Banjo-Tooie are the minigames. Collecting jiggies often means completing some sort of simple task, or winning in a minigame. At first, this seemed good and fun, until I realized how few minigames there actually were and how often they reused them. Like this fishing minigame here. They do this minigame like 3 times. And this game isn't particularly long. I beat the entire thing 100% in a single 6-hour session. That's incredibly short compared to the console games. And you're telling me that they couldn't fill a 6-hour game with more than 6 minigames? I'm also not a huge fan of invisible walls, and oftentimes in this game they won't let you jump over something, even if it's clearly not high enough to stop you. I mean, what is this, Minecraft? Why can't I jump over this fence? The graphics, for the most part, are great. The game uses the same kind of digitized graphical style that they used in Donkey Kong Country, so the models and animations are all spot on and perfect. Just super compressed into a Game Boy Advance. Both Banjo and Kazooie's speech bubble icons look just awful. Kazooie just looks kinda lifeless and cardboard cutouty, and Banjo, just look at his eyes. Is it just me, or does he have just really dead eyes? Demonic eyes. But yeah, the game looks good. It's colorful, the levels all look distinct and unique. There's some derpiness to the graphics at times, but overall, it's good. And the music's good too. It's catchy, and it definitely has that Banjo-Kazooie charm. It's not quite as good as the soundtracks from the original 2 games, but it's not bad. Honestly, better than I would expect from a Game Boy Advance Banjo game. The music is really only held back by the hardware. Some of the other sound design is questionable though. This game continues to do the whole gibberish thing when characters talk. For the most part, it just kinda sounds the same as it previously did. But I don't know if it's just me, but it kind of sounds like there's less variety? What I mean is, as far as I can tell, the way they did it in the originals is that they would have a bunch of short cut-up sound clips, and then when a character would talk, they would just program it to randomly select and play those sound clips one after another, which resulted in the random gibberish that we all know and love. But here, it kinda just feels like their library of sound effects is shorter, making the gibberish voices sound more repetitive and annoying. Might just be me, could just be that I find them a bit more annoying when the sound quality isn't quite as good. I couldn't tell you for sure. I know that Bozai's voice annoys me, that's for sure. Sorry, Banjo, you'll have to come back when you have Kazooie if you want me to even fix a price for this move. You already sort of have a price. Tells me right there. Yeah, the writing in this game could be a bit better. As I mentioned before, they don't really do much with the time travel stuff, but even past that, the writing isn't amazing. It's not awful, it just feels lesser so, compared to the other games. Where the first two games had funny and goofy characters, this game has forgettable NPCs that on the rare occasion might have a funny line or two. Where the original game had constant groaner puns and Kazooie being a jerk, this game has maybe one or two of those puns, and well, Kazooie's still a jerk, but maybe just not as often. I don't know, the writing's not awful, it's just not great. But hey, at least Grunty's back to rhyming in this game, unlike in Banjo-Tooie. So I've made it to what's presumably the final boss. I damage Grunty a bunch, and suddenly the music changes. That music. I wonder what's about to happen. Okay, so let me just say it right here. This game, not difficult. It's easy. And the boss fights are all easy as well. In fact, they're total pushovers. It never took me more than a single attempt to beat a single one. Except for the final fight, which is much harder. But not really fun at all. First, before you can even enter the final boss area, you have to do one of these beat the timer things, where you hit a switch and then you have to race somewhere before the time runs out. And then you have to do an extended Grunty fight, which isn't difficult, it's just boring. I've already basically done this fight earlier in the game. And then when that's done, she runs off and you're given trivia questions. Classic Banjo. Now, I'm not complaining about this part, except for the fact that if you get them wrong, then you have to redo the previous boss fight from square one. Okay, yeah, I guess I am complaining a bit. This quiz section should be before the fight, not during it. And sometimes, instead of questions, it gives you a minigame, like this one, that I'm completely sick of playing. And if you take damage during these minigames, then it carries over into the boss fights. And there's no health to be found. It's a battle of endurance. And I did say fights, plural, because there are multiple boss fights in a row. Die at any point, and you have to start all over. And you're not even sent back to the beginning of the boss battle. You're sent back to Spiral Mountain, so you have to redo that beat the timer thing. This really sucks. And in the third and final battle, Grunty shot an attack at me. I didn't know how to avoid it first try. It was a homing attack, and it killed me. That means I have to replay all the way back to that point just to attempt again. The final boss is true to form, I guess. The final bosses from the first two games were also pretty damn brutal, but I feel like they weren't this bad. Like, they were creative and fun. And the quiz segments came before them. It wasn't a part of the fight. And also, full disclosure, this fight is really annoying, but it's not even very challenging. So it doesn't even have that feeling of accomplishment going for it. It's annoying and it can be time consuming, but after only a couple of attempts, I was easily able to win. And with that, I beat the game. Still can't believe I 100%ed a Banjo game in less than 6 hours. And I get a rank at the end. 4 Jiggies and then a 5th faded one. So I guess 4.5? I did everything in the game 100%, so why not 5? Well, whatever, the game is done. My final verdict? It was alright. It was pretty good. It's fun, and it feels like a Banjo game. I ultimately enjoyed my time playing through it. I wish it was a little harder. Specifically, I personally wish that there were more sections that focused on more difficult platforming. Despite being easy though, the game can still be annoying at times. For example, enemies respawn constantly, and seemingly not even on a timer. It seems like if they're off screen, then they'll respawn immediately. The whole game just feels kind of rushed, I guess? Like, there's a lot of good here, a lot of potential, but maybe they just rushed it and didn't have much to show for it. Maybe it was a problem with not having enough space on the cartridge or something? I'm not sure. I'm not gonna be too harsh though. There's a fair bit to complain about, but there's plenty that I enjoyed. There's just not as much to talk about there. It's not an amazing game, it's just alright. My biggest complaint just being that I wish there was more of everything. More boss fights, more story, more time put into the writing, more levels and minigames, and by extension, more music. But the way I see it is that if your biggest complaint about something is that you wish that there was more, then it can't be awful. This game isn't amazing, it's not as good as the first two, but if you're a huge Banjo-Kazooie fan and you haven't played this, then you might find some enjoyment out of it. Play it if you can pick it up for cheap, and if you don't mind it being pretty short. So yeah, that's my verdict. Pretty good game. Well, it sounds like past me is done in the washroom, so I guess we should go back now.
Great Scott, you're right. Then let's get going. Back to the future.
This was completely pointless. This was a complete waste of time. Could have just stayed in the present.
You clearly don't understand the appeal of a time travel story.
So this may seem a bit late. I know that they announced it at E3 and it's already out now, but still, I really need to talk about it. And this is a great time to celebrate. Banjo and Kazooie are in freaking Smash Brothers. This is insane. I never thought that this would happen. This is like my #1 choice for Smash Brothers.